Welcome class to your first day of Streaming 101. I really shouldn't have those on with my contacts. A lot of the curriculum of film studies is movies that have been around forever. What I've taken the liberty of doing is making my own curriculum that relies solely on films that you can stream online. The first category that we typically talk about in film studies is the silent era. Prior to 1927, film did not have sound. Many silent films had an orchestra accompaniment, so if you'd go to a theater, there would actually be live music playing along with the film. And a lot of these films rely so heavily on performance, so if you're someone that's looking into acting or a director who's going to be directing actors, these films are great ones to look at. Even though the visuals maybe aren't that exciting because it's black and white, it's something that I think is really important to study. So what I watched in film class to study this era was Sherlock Jr. starring Buster Keaton. You can watch Sherlock Jr. on Canopy, which you probably haven't heard of, and you're probably like, what is that? Canopy is a streaming service that you probably have access to through your school. Canopy is often used by film professors to show films in class, so it is a great option if you just want to look and explore some more historic films. Then, after you've seen Sherlock Jr., I'm gonna recommend The Artist. Now, I've never seen The Artist, to be honest, but The Artist is about the silent era. It is about a silent movie star, and it won the 2012 Oscar for Best Picture. I think, personally, you can learn a lot more about a segment of time of history based on how it's remembered. For example, Hamilton. We all loved it. We spent our entire summer listening and memorizing every word to the soundtrack, right? I'm pretty sure you'd think that Hamilton is more interesting than reading something from the time of Hamilton. And it won an Oscar, so if you're looking to be an Oscar-winning or award-winning filmmaker someday, you need to kind of watch the movies that get the eyes of the Academy, right? And this is something that for some reason a lot of film professors don't seem to do. The Artist is currently streaming on Netflix, so if you want to check it out, head over to Netflix. The Jazz Singer, which released in 1927, was the first sync sound, and it brought movies into the sound age. So no longer did films have to be solely based on physicality or tell their entire story through visuals. Now you had the added benefit of music and speaking roles for actors. Singing in the Rain is about silent movie stars transferring into the sound age, and I had to choose my favorite film of all time, La La Land. La La Land gets a lot of hate from people. Is also involved in a controversy with Warren Beatty announcing it as the Best Picture winner when actually Moonlight won that year. So that was, a thing. But La La Land is perfect for anyone wanting to study cinema. It's a movie about movies, and a movie specifically about musicals. La La Land and Singing in the Rain are available on HBO Max. As I said previously, The Jazz Singer is not available to stream. Alright, and then we enter the golden age of Hollywood. This is the studio era when stars and directors all worked for a single studio and they just pumped out movies like no one's business. The golden era of Hollywood, I would say, lasts from like the 30s to the 50s. For the golden age of Hollywood, the film that you are gonna hear about if you're any sort of film major, probably for the rest of your life, is Citizen Kane. I'm gonna say it. Citizen Kane's not the most interesting film in the world, but it is definitely so interesting for what it put forth at the time of being filmed. Citizen Kane changed a lot for filmmaking. It was one of the first narrative features that incorporated all these new elements and really got creative with how do you film the story that you want. It is definitely a film that didn't settle based on the technology of its time. It still stands up compared to movies nowadays, although the plot might not be as interesting. The technological achievements and the visual style of that film is so incredible. Just pull it up on HBO Max, where it's streaming right now. Once you watch Citizen Kane, there's a lot of other movies from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, from that studio era. Things you know. Casablanca, also on HBO Max. And The Wizard of Oz, also on HBO Max. Okay, the next one I really just don't even want to talk about, but I would also be a fool to not talk about it. The French New Wave. Now, did I hear a lot of sighs in my own head? Yes. Do I like the French Wave at all? Absolutely not. In fact, if I could throw out one part of film history and all the knowledge I've gathered, I would throw out everything I knew about the French New Wave. But it's kind of important. Basically, Francis Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard and a bunch of other guys were like, hey, we want to do something different. But instead of just being different, they were like so oppositional to that certain tendency of French cinema, and they decided that they were just going to create these films that were so unconventional, discontinuous, so like not using proper continuity in their films, just kind of experimented with cinema. However, I think a lot of what they did was pretty important to show kind of how we inherently view cinema and try to challenge that perception. So what I watched to learn about the French New Wave in cinema classes was Breathless, which is kind of the most common one, and I'll be honest, I think it's because it's the most bearable. You've kind of only got 2 characters to follow. The plot's not too wacky, and I have been told that The 400 Blows, which is kind of partly autobiographical from Francis Truffaut, is a great film. If you want to check out Breathless, you can watch it on HBO Max, Canopy, which we talked about earlier, or the Criterion Channel. Criterion Channel is another subscription service that if you're very into art cinema or international cinema that you might want to check out or get a subscription to. But if you kind of want to see an experimentation of traditional cinema form, you're so much better off watching anything by Spike Lee. However, I will specifically recommend Do the Right Thing. His work is a lot more narratively sound, and therefore it's much more enjoyable for an American audience who's used to continuity editing where A happens, then B happens, then C happens as a result. Do the Right Thing is streaming on Fubo TV if you have that, or on Amazon if you have a Showtime add-on. Now we're going to talk about Soviet Montage. Soviet Montage was a theory brought up by association of 2 images. You could express a completely new thought to someone. The best example of this is the stair scene in Battleship Potemkin. You can watch Battleship Potemkin on Prime Video. The problem is, it's like an old Soviet film, and to be honest, it's kind of just that scene down the steps that I think is really that important. To be honest, that's all I've ever seen of it, so I don't really know that you need to watch the whole thing. What Montage is known more of today is kind of like a string of images that shows the passing of time. I was gonna recommend Rocky, which is one of my all-time favorite films, but it's not streaming anywhere. Go to your local Goodwill, you can pick up a copy for probably like $2, but if you don't wanna do that, Up, I think, is the best modern use of a montage, and it tells a story that literally brings people to tears in a matter of minutes. Go watch the beginning of Up, which is streaming on Disney+. And now back to America. Widescreen was kind of the next upgrade for American cinema, stretching the size of your aspect ratio and making it longer and wider, and adding color, which had become commonplace by that point, to a film made it way more appealing for people to go to the movie, get out of their homes, and turn off their TVs. With a bigger frame, a wider frame, you have a lot more visual information to include, and so you started to get films like The Graduate. The Graduate, unfortunately, is not available to stream. That is a great movie. That is one of the best movies I've seen in a film class. You definitely need to watch it. After you've seen The Graduate, I think a great option for that time is Jaws, which is streaming on HBO Max. Jaws took extreme advantage of color, of the widescreen, and it leads us into our next category of being one of the first summer blockbusters. Blockbusters and American educated film directors. So around the 60s was the time that George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, Spike Lee were all off at college, and then in the 80s, their movies started coming out. This is kind of where I get confused with film school curriculum and with professors' choices with films, because my professors chose to show us Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is a Steven Spielberg film, but it's like 3 hours, and I'll be honest, when my professor showed it to us on the last day before Thanksgiving break, and our class went over an hour so we could watch a movie about aliens, I was a little pissed off. Instead, go watch Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. That is the best Star Wars film. That's not a debate. That is a correct answer. Now into the 90s, which is the era of independent cinema. Independent cinema started in the 90s, but it really kind of took off in the mid-2000s because by that point there were enough people wanting to enter film that there was a clear enough distinction between the top filmmakers, the student filmmakers, and people kind of in the middle. So for my intro to cinema class, we watched Winter's Bone, which was the very first movie that Jennifer Lawrence ever starred in. She's fantastic in it. The film is a great film, so I highly recommend it. You can watch Winter's Bone on Canopy or on Amazon with a Cinemax add-on. Or another great option that's actually from the 90s is a film called Safe, which is a great film. It's kind of a thriller and it's kind of creepy, and it's also a really slow burn. So if you like stuff that's way more fast-paced, this might be a skip for you. But Safe's also not available to stream, but I just kind of wanted to throw it in there because it was a very memorable movie for me. But if those indie films don't pique your interest, then I think you should watch The Blair Witch Project. The Blair Witch Project was made for an extremely low budget, and it is kind of like a horror mockumentary, and it came out in, I think, 1999. But I don't really like horror, so if you just look up independent film, you could watch like The Florida Project, which is on Netflix right now, or Moonlight, or Fruitvale Station, which I'll put in where that's from. It was Ryan Coogler's first film. Anyways, check those out. Our second to last category is film noir, which is technically not a movement, it is technically not a genre, it is a mode of filmmaking. But film noir is an interesting example because it's kind of hard to teach. Usually there's like a leading male character and he's like looking through the blinds at some point. It's a very high contrast film. It's usually black and white. Film noir is just kind of hard to get a grasp on. One of the best film noir films that I've ever seen was A Third Man, which I actually didn't watch as a part of film studies. I watched it as a part of my screenwriting class for EMST, but it's a great movie, also starring Orson Welles, who apparently was very difficult to work with on that production. But The Third Man is streaming on IndieFlix, but it may not be available to film, but it's like $4 on the iTunes store if you want to buy it. But I think film noir might be more helpful in a modern context, so I've kind of got a couple things here. Sin City, which is a Robert Rodriguez film, and it's streaming on CBS All Access, and it stars Bruce Willis, and it's much more comic book form, but I think it's highly, highly stylized film noir, and therefore it's a little bit easier to pick up on, and you might then be able to go back to older film noir films and see like, oh, I get it now. Another option is Batman Begins, so the Nolan Batman trilogy, and I think that's a great example because Batman's a vigilante, like kind of working against the police. There's a lot of crime in the city. I believe the entire Nolan Batman trilogy is streaming on HBO Max. And our last category, because I just couldn't not include it, is animation. I think animation has contributed a lot to film, other than my one exception. All of these are gonna be streaming on Disney+. There's some great animated films you can watch on Netflix, don't get me wrong. I think Disney kind of takes the cake when you're talking about this. So the two I would recommend to you that I've watched in film classes is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, because it's the first Disney film, and it also was one of the first films in color. That's super cool. And then my other one would be the original Toy Story, which of course was the first full-length CGI animated feature film. It's crazy to watch that film and see in 25 years how far 3D animation has come. Now, if those are too old for you, I've got 3 other options that are very important to the history of animation. 1, Frozen. Frozen bailed Disney out of bankruptcy. I think Disney has made a huge turning point and, in my opinion, has taken over the success that Pixar used to have in the early 2000s, and they're taking it into the 2020s. It's also just a wholly great film, and then you get to watch Frozen 2 afterwards if you've seen it, so that's an option. Toy Story 4, all you need to know is that there's a split diopter lens, so they created a camera in a computer to look like a split diopter lens. The detail in Toy Story 4, even though I will say it, I don't like that movie. I think the plot's pretty weak, and I try to pretend that it just like doesn't exist. The details and the accomplishments that film has brought to realistic and hyperrealism animation while still being like Pixar style, incredible. Absolutely amazing. And then last but not least, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which is streaming on Netflix. So if you don't have Disney Plus, this is the one animated film I would say that you should check out. This movie is just incredible. One, it's a great story. It's a great integration of an intellectual property that's so well known but has so many different avenues, and the animation style, absolutely incredible. It's like none other. With that being said, that is my curriculum for film school at home. I really hope you guys enjoy the recommendations. I hope they're helpful to you. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. I really enjoyed filming this video, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. So have an absolutely amazing, wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in my very next video. Bye everyone.